What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video on my channel about gold making. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about a very interesting theme, the theme of botting and multiboxing. Because a lot of people have different views about why this is bad for the game and if it's even bad for the game, at least some parts of it. And I thought I'd show you a model. We're going to look at the effect that botting and multiboxing to a lesser extent will have on the distribution of resources between players, and I think this is going to be quite interesting to look at because I've never seen anyone mention this part of the problem before. I've never seen it mentioned. So we're gonna look at it from a slightly different perspective. So what we need to look at, what we need before we can get started, is a model that will explain, or we need to have a model for the distribution of farming time between different players. And we're gonna take a trick, or we're gonna take some tricks from real world economics, and we're gonna utilize the Pareto distribution, or the 2080. Which is the basis for the 2080 rule, which I'm sure many of you have heard. 20% of the populace holds 80% of the wealth, for instance. So this is a distribution that's been very useful for real-world economics, for modeling wealth distribution in the real world. So I think that makes it pretty perfect for looking at how farming time is distributed, because not everyone farms the same amount of time, obviously. Some of us farm a lot, or I don't farm a lot at all, some farm little. And I think on average we should expect most people to not really farm that much. And then there are some people who farm an exorbitant amount of time. We can take a look at this. So this is the first graph we'll take a quick look at. This is how it looks if you distribute. If you use I've made a different or a specific variation of the Pareto distribution that we can use. So this is, we're going to see that most people don't really farm that much, and then there are a few people that farm a lot. Of course, this is going to be farming time per day, so I don't think it's realistic that any one player will farm 21 hours per day or 24 hours or whatever this extreme value is. In fact, I even omitted one that's even higher up that I'm still using, because it doesn't really matter that much if it's not technically possible, because we're mostly interested in the distribution along this. You could use this to really measure anything, but what we have here is that it starts at about 0.15 of an hour, so that's like 10 minutes on average per day, something like that. And most people are the average farming time per day is about a little over half an hour. In this distribution that I'm using. Not sure if that's like going to be completely correct, but it doesn't really matter that much, because the important thing is that the general assumption is correct, and that's the assumption that the people who farm the most farm a lot more than the average player. And I think that's very much going to be the case across pretty much everything in World of Warcraft, that the people who care the most about something, absolute most, are going to generate a very significant portion of the time spent doing that. So as long as we can agree that that's a good way to model gold farming in particular, which is what we're focusing on in this video, because botting has the largest effect, or at least the most easily looked at effect, botting and multiboxing on when it comes to farming. So this is what we've assumed, and regardless of how much gold or materials you generate per hour, that doesn't really matter. You're still going to end up with the same type of distribution of resources, which is what we see here. So now everyone just has one account. But some people are farming significantly more hours than others. So right now, about 20% of the materials or raw gold being generated by farming is going to be generated by the top 1%, the people who spend the 1% that spend the most time. 42% of the resources are in the top 5%, and 65% of the resources are in top 20. So this is like not quite as extreme as the 2080 rule. We've gone with a slightly less top favored distribution for this example. And the important part here, perhaps, is this one, and this is what's going to be very important for the overall point that I'm trying to make, is the percentage generated by the bottom 50%. Because what I've heard a lot, is that multiboxing and botting is good for average Joe players because it means that material prices are lower because more materials are being generated. And if that's the only thing you're looking at in a vacuum, then yes, you are correct. More materials will be generated, and it will be easier to find your ore or your gems or whatever on the auction house. That will be cheaper. But all else is not equal, and that's what we're looking at in this video. The resource distribution. Because they're going to be cheaper, but any farming method that you can do is going to be worse if you only have one account. Because you'll be competing with people who have 2 accounts, who have 3 accounts, or might even be running bot farms. Like, how are you going to compete with that in gold per hour? You're not. And when loads of people are multiboxing, then the gold per hour of 5 accounts, if that's good enough to justify it to the multiboxers, then they don't care about the gold per hour of 1 account. And since there's way more materials being generated, the price of materials goes down. So the value of your own farming goes down significantly, and you can't really keep up. So you might be paying less gold, and the raw gold you generate from just doing quests and callings and stuff like that will go slightly farther, yes, but every other method of resource generation for you personally is going to be worse because you'll be generating a much smaller portion of the pie. And now let's take a look. So this is what we're gonna show now. What happens? What if the top 1%, only the top 1%? So that means 1 out of every 100 players, the 1 person of every 100. Because we're going to assume that the people who farm the most already are the ones who are most likely to utilize multiboxing. Maybe not for botting, but it doesn't really matter because we know that bots can completely ignore the time constraints of being an actual person. But what happens to the distribution of resources, whether it's gold or materials, if the top 1% of farmers are now running 5 accounts, which means they're 5 times more efficient with their farming? This is what happens. The percentage of resources generated by the top 1% goes from 23 to 60% of all resources being generated in the game. And, well, you can hardly see it here, but the percentage generated by the bottom 50% goes from 17% to 9% of all the resources. Of course, it's the same amount of raw resources they are generating because they're farming the same amount of time. But this is now a much smaller portion of the pie. They now are objectively worse off. They are now actually half as poor or half as rich as they were. So even if material prices have gone down, they're still worse off. Of course, this also leads to the top 5, top 20, and whatever increasing, but it's all due to the change in the top 1%. And this isn't even that extreme. This is just them running 5 accounts and farming. Well, they're farming a lot, but they're just running 5 accounts, which in the realm of multiboxing is not a lot. In the realm of botting, this is not a lot at all. So in actual fact, it's even worse. So let's take a look at what it could be with botting. What happens? What happens if the top 1% runs 40 accounts? They run 40 accounts, farming the same methods that everyone else is doing, and they're equally efficient per hour. You want to know what happens then? The percentage generated by the bottom 50% goes down to 2% of the resources in the game. That's how much they have. That's how much they generate. And the top 1% now run away with 92% of all resources being generated in the game. Do you think this is good for the game? I don't think this is good for the game at all. I think this effect, it doesn't really matter so much what your assumptions are, particularly when it comes to botting, because botting, they can break the game. They don't have to play. They don't have to be there. They just run it on the cloud or on a computer or whatever. It can run 24/7 if they wanted to. They probably don't because that's a little bit risky, but they can play. Their bot can play for more hours than they can. And even if it's might be slightly less efficient than like a player playing at peak efficiency, I don't think it's going to be much less efficient than that. they're gonna be cranking. They're gonna be cranking out resources at the level that no one else will. And since they can ignore the playtime restrictions, they are just gonna be generating a very large portion of the resource pie. And this just makes everyone else worse off, because doing something with one account is then just gonna be worse. You're not competing on the same in the same ground rules. And in the subject of farming, when the botters are farming with 5, 10, 20 accounts, their problem isn't no longer to get a good price for their materials. Their problem is now, how do I even get rid of all my materials? Okay, I'll craft. I'll run up some crafting accounts, and have some accounts running some scripts to craft automatically. But since I don't really care about the crafting profit, I just care about getting more different items onto the auction house, because it's hard to sell all my materials straight up, so I want to sell some of them as crafted items as well. Then the problem isn't to craft profitably, and this turns all of the crafting professions in the game into a money sink, instead of a way to make money by helping your fellow players. You could, of course, argue that this is good as well, that crafting professions is boring, and sitting around on the scrapper in BFA for hours at a time is terrible gameplay, and I wouldn't disagree with that specifically, but it still means that spending any sort of effort on like actually engaging with the profession system or playing the game as a solo player is just objectively worse, and at some point not even worth it. So why should you play the game then? And I think that's why I personally think it was a good idea for Blizzard to remove multiboxing from the game, because they have had an extreme efficiency advantage, and the same thing for botters, obviously. Now, of course, this is me throwing rocks in glass houses a little bit, because I have 2 accounts, and I use Trade Skill Master and the second monitor to be a lot more efficient than someone with just 1 account. Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I'm doing stuff that someone with just 1 account can't replicate straight up. They will have to spend significantly more time, or they are bounded by the amount of time they have on their main account, which is going to limit how much they can do, whereas I don't have that limitation, and that means that I can effectively break the game a little bit. So there's still those kinds of efficiency differentials in the game. Not sure if any of them are that healthy. Of course, one person running 2 accounts and having to tab back and forth is not that insane. But it is an advantage that people with just 1 account do not have. So there is that. At least it's not quite on the level of multiboxing, but you could certainly argue that this is bad for the game as well. At some point, having auctions on the auction house is important, though. But I'm not going to tell you whether or not that's right or not. What I was hoping to show here is that there is a very good reason to think that both multiboxing and botting is bad for the game and bad for the economy of the game. Even though both of those things will lead to cheaper items in raw gold prices, all else being equal. All else is not equal, and that's the more important thing here. If some players are allowed a massive efficiency boost compared to normal players, then they will run away with a very large portion of the resources in the game, and that's bad for the game, because it means that doing anything as a regular Joe, someone who comes home from work and wants to play an hour or 2 of WoW and maybe have some gold, just isn't worth it. And that's going to eventually make them quit, because it's no fun if you can't engage. That maybe you're something who's interested in farming or the economy of the game or crafting professions, and you just see the botters and you just see the multiboxers operating at an efficiency that you can't reach. That's just going to discourage you. So I hope the Blizzard will continue their their crusade against bots, and I hope they'll succeed at keeping them as low as possible. Of course, it's expensive, and as the botting interview showed on the Auction House podcast, they've not succeeded well so far. But we shall see. There's been a large ban wave recently for the most popular Lua unlockers, so hopefully that means that we'll see a more reasonable economy where someone who is just running 1 account and playing in the intended way can be a factor in the economy. So yeah, guys, do you agree? Do you disagree with these points? Is there something I missed or something I can share with the assumption if anyone's interested? But I'm not going to throw a bunch of math here because it's only really interesting for the people who have a background in statistics or economy. So hit me up in the comments if you're interested in that. And I'd definitely love to hear your thoughts on this. I've never seen anyone discuss it in this way before, which is why I had to make the video. I've been thinking about this for a long time, actually, all the way since the Auction House podcast had their second botting interview. Because their botter, he was like, yeah, I think botting is slightly good for the game because we generate more materials, and I think that while that's theoretically true in a vacuum, I think the other effects of botting are so much worse for the game overall, that the slightly positive effect on material prices doesn't even register in the grand scheme of things. So yeah, let me know. Leave a like or a comment down below if you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you on the next one. Goodbye, guys.